Welcome to the Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. Founded in 1701, nearly 320 years ago, the city remains the largest municipality in the state of Michigan, with a population of 673,000. It's the largest city on the U.S.-Canadian border and was once a sprawling hub of manufacturing during the Industrial Revolution. Henry Ford called Detroit home, turning the city into a thriving economic powerhouse centered around the automotive industry. Though Detroit has been on the decline in both industry and population since the mid-1950s, the city still has a lot of industries and corporations that call it home. Serving those industries, as they did back in Detroit's heyday in the 1940s, are the railroads. When it comes to watching trains, Detroit is up every railfan's alley. With freight operations among all four Eastern Class I railroad companies, Amtrak passenger service, Shortlines, an operating interlocking tower at Delray Junction, multiple international-thru trains on both Canadian Pacific and Canadian National, and hot metal trains at U.S. Steel's Great Lakes Works, Detroit offers a wide variety of rail action for everyone. Attracted by the assortment of trains and railroads, Delray in-block Productions set out to document Detroit's most iconic rail locations, like Delray Tower, Michigan Central Station, and the Detroit River Tunnel. The date is December 28, 2019. We would begin our adventure on the final Saturday of the decade, as the 20s would be upon us only 3 days later. Meeting up with some local area rail fans, we set up at a popular train watching spot just behind Thunderbolt Lanes at the west end of Oakwood Yard. Located along the former Wabash Railroad, now on the Detroit district of the Norfolk Southern's Dearborn Division, Oakwood Yard is dwarfed by the Marathon Petroleum Refinery. It's Norfolk Southern's principal yard in the Detroit metro area and sees an average of 20 daily freight trains between the NS and Canadian Pacific, who operate through trains via trackage rights between Detroit and Chicago. Melvindale is a popular spot for rail fans who enjoy watching remote-controlled yard switchers work the west end of the yard while other trains stop to pick up cars before departure. Norfolk Southern SD 40-2 number 6152 has been a mainstay at Oakwood since 2014 and is often seen in local or remote control yard service. Oakwood Junction, also known as OJ, is where Norfolk Southern and Canadian National Railway cross mains. CN operates the former Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton line from Dearborn to Flat Rock, Michigan. Canadian National Railway interchanges with Norfolk Southern at Oakwood Yard, running a transfer job between Flat Rock and Melvindale over the former DT&I. Around 9 a.m., we captured local freight train L572, departing the yard for Flat Rock, Michigan. Upon leaving Oakwood, the dispatcher will then line the train at OJ for the run down to Flat Rock Yard. In Allen Park, across the track from the newly built Hampton Inn, a group of Detroit area railfans gathered with our crew to capture the train under the double concrete arches south of OJ. In charge of the local today is CN C44-9W number 2533, which was built by GE in March of 1997. Known as the Shoreline subdivision, this rail line is famous for the concrete catenary arches that were built by the DT&I under Henry Ford's ownership in the mid-1920s, when the business tycoon opted to electrify his newly acquired railroad from Dearborn to Flat Rock. Essentially, the DT&I was Ford's dedicated railroad, shipping raw materials and industrial goods from southern Ohio to his factories in Detroit, Michigan. Though Ford ultimately would be forced to exit the railroad business in 1929, these arches stand as a legacy for his grand vision to ultimately electrify the entire railroad from Detroit to Ironton, with the intent to extend the line to Deepwater, West Virginia, where an interchange with the Virginian Railway would be established. Ford intended to buy the electrified Virginian to connect his railroad to the ports and shipping lanes on the Atlantic Ocean, but unfortunately his dream never became a reality. Once the rest of the train was assembled, L572 would continue south. Penford Junction would be the last spot we captured L572 on its journey back to Flat Rock, Michigan. Penford is where the CN crosses Conrail shared assets, a remnant of the original Consolidated Rail Corporation jointly operated by Norfolk Southern and CSX. Penford is a railfan favorite location for still photography, with the dramatic concrete arches straight-lining the track as far as the eye can see. In the late 1950s, during the construction of Interstate 75 through Michigan, several concrete arches were removed for this highway bridge over the railroad. The arches were so strong, dynamite had to be used in order to bring them down. Since then, CN has shown very little interest in removing the remaining arches, as the project would be cost prohibitive. Indeed, Henry Ford built his electrified DT&I to last. After catching L572 one last time at Penford Junction, we visited CN's Schaefer Yard, where a lone Grand Trunk GP38-2 was seen idling in the yard. Schaefer is often bustling with activity, but today there wasn't much to witness in terms of switching maneuvers. We were pleased enough to capture a few photos of this red and blue veteran locomotive as it waited the next assignment. Moving along to Delray Junction, we would be treated to a multitude of freight rail action. Our first train at this location would be none other than eastbound Canadian Pacific through train number 244 as it made its way to the Detroit River Tunnel and into Canada. .244 originates on the Indiana Harbor Belt as a daily Gibson, Indiana to Toronto, Ontario manifest freight. Delray Junction is the home of Delray Tower, the last manned interlocking tower in Michigan not involving a railroad bridge. It's also one of the last active towers in the Midwest. This Detroit area railroad landmark has been in operation since 1945, with the original wooden tower from the 1890s being replaced by the current structure. As of early 2020, the Delray Tower operator controls the junction for CSX, Norfolk Southern, Conrail, and both CN and CP. Jumping ahead of train 244, we would set up near the Michigan Central Station from the Bagley Street Bridge. Once the tallest train station in the world, the building was opened in December of 1913 and closed in 1988 when Amtrak service ceased and relocated to another station north of downtown. In its peak during the 1940s, nearly 4,000 passengers a day arrived and departed from this once very busy railroad station. Unfortunately, Bagley Street is about the only way to get a decent shot of CP trains with the station in the background. These tall suicide fences prevent us from using a tripod, but thanks to some small holes cut in the fence by local area railfans, we were able to capture train 244 as it continued east into Canada. Just beyond the station, the Canadian Pacific train enters the former Michigan Central Railroad Detroit River Tunnel. Built between 1906 and 1910, the tunnel was opened to rail traffic on July 26, 1910, and acts as an international gateway for rail traffic in and out of Detroit. The tunnel is actually home to one of the steepest railroad grades in Michigan. Not known for mountainous territory, Michigan is relatively flat, However, the grades leading in and out of the tunnel are quite steep, and loaded trains climbing out are often in full Notch 8 as they exit the portals. The grade is 2% going west toward Detroit and 1.6% east towards Windsor. With train 244 through the tunnel and into Ontario, Canada, we would head back to Delray Junction, where we captured eastbound Canadian National Manifest Freight Q116, a Chicago, Illinois to Flat Rock, Michigan train. On the point were two BNSF locomotives. Delray Tower is slated to close within the next 2 years, and the railroads are preparing for a costly makeover of the junction. To the right of the main, we observed new rail that is intended to be used when the diamond is replaced and the tracks realigned. As Canadian National Q116 continues towards Flat Rock, a pair of CSX locomotives are seen with a long cut of cars from Rougemere Yard. CSX actually controls Delray Junction, with the tower operators as employees. After Q116 had cleared the diamond, the CSX train eased out onto the connection track before shoving back into Rougemere Yard. About 30 minutes later, Canadian Pacific Train 140 would run through Delray with a single AC-44CW on the point and another as a mid-train distributed power unit, or DPU. According to local area railroad enthusiasts, due to the new precision-scheduled railroading mold of operations, CP has been testing out longer trains with less locomotives while distributing power more and more over the system. CP Train 140 is a daily Bensenville, Illinois to Toronto, Ontario manifest freight. Delray is a unique location and is situated within one of Detroit's roughest neighborhoods. The crime rate in this area is extremely high, so much so that Delray Tower was equipped with bulletproof windows after a shooting incident several years ago where the tower was struck at night. A bullet hole even pierced the lever machine. We advise anyone watching trains in this area to keep your eyes open to crime and gang activity. As one can see, the locals were out in droves during our visit, with several teenage boys speeding down the pothole-ridden roads with excessively loud crotch rocket bikes. It took train 140 about 15 minutes to clear the junction. It was one of the longest trains we've seen in recent years. Many railfans were trackside during our visit, including Ken Borg and his two sons, Rob and William. The Borg family are well known around Detroit for being the family that railfans together. After 140 had cleared, they set up on the backside of the tower to capture CP local train T40, a Melvindale to Windsor interchange job between Norfolk Southern and Canadian Pacific. A trio of Canadian Pacific SD30C Eco locomotives are in charge of today's local, which in our opinion are among the best looking modernized EMDs in North America today. Canadian Pacific's local trains through Delray can be very confusing. Local T2728 runs from Wednesday through Sunday from Windsor to Oakwood Yard and back. On Monday and Tuesday, CP T4041 runs from Windsor to Norfolk Southern's Oakwood Yard and back. Then on Wednesday through Thursday, the train runs to CSX Rougemere Yard and back. On Saturday and Sunday, train T4041 runs from Windsor to Oakwood and back. Once T40 had cleared the Diamond, Canadian Pacific Train 141, a daily Toronto, Ontario to Bensenville, Illinois manifest train, rounded the curve at Delray Junction headed west. Upon capturing 141 at Delray, we traveled about 25 minutes outside of Metro Detroit to capture the train at speed along Norfolk Southern's former Wabash Railroad main line. From Detroit until the trains turn onto the Chicago line in Butler, Indiana, CP utilizes trackage rights over the Detroit district. Here at Belleville, Michigan, CP 141 is seen charging westward at track speed, which is 50 miles per hour for manifest freight. Later in the evening, we ventured back to Delray to document the last days of the Great Lakes Works bottle trains. On December 20th, 8 days before our visit, it was announced that U.S. Steel Corporation would be closing down its iron and steelmaking operations by April 1st. The part of the mill that rolls slabs into sheets of steel will shutter by the end of 2020. About 1,500 jobs will be lost. U.S. Steel had already announced a temporary layoff of about 200 workers at the plant earlier this year. The company may keep some adjoining operations and a warehouse open if justified by customer demand, but eventually it will shift all steel production to a plant in Gary, Indiana, where it recently made a $750 million investment. During our visit, we had the opportunity to capture multiple bottle trains, with hot metal being transported from Zug Island to the BOP shop about 2 miles to the south. Delray Connecting, not to be confused with the Adrian and Blissfield subsidiary called the Detroit Connecting, interchanges with CN, Norfolk Southern, CSX, and Conrail shared assets. The railroad operates on nearly 15.5 miles of track using 6 diesel locomotives. 2 of the units are conventional locomotives that are used by 2-man crews, and 3 are used by remote control, 1-man crews in hot metal service. The railroad has been in operation since March 24, 1904. Indeed, this is truly an end of an era for Detroit area railroading. We found Norfolk Southern Manifest Freight Train 121 working the west end of Oakwood Yard. 121 is a daily Sterling Heights, Michigan to East St. Louis, Illinois freight train that stops to work Brush Yard in Decatur, Illinois while en route. We also captured NS number 6152 again, working the yard into the night. In the distance, the viewer can make out the dim headlight of CP train number 650, a Waseca, Minnesota to Albany, New York loaded ethanol train. An AC-44CWM is in charge of the train this evening, while another AC-44CW was pushing as the end-of-train distributed power unit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, it was time to call it a day. Detroit had been good to us, and we couldn't wait to return. Little did we know that just 3 days later, we'd be back. The next time it would be for a heritage locomotive on New Year's Day. The first day of 2020 and the first day of the new decade was a cold one. After a midnight heads up on New Year's Eve from local area railfan Tyler Pate, we decided to venture outside in the early morning hours to capture Canadian Pacific SD70 ACU number 7010 leading eastbound Manifest Train 140 through Belleville, Michigan. With a burnt-out ditch light, 7010 would still be a delight to many rail fans in southeast Michigan as it made its way towards Canada in perfect morning light. Trailing in mid-train DPU service was ES44AC number 8888. In an exclusive interview with Trains Newswire in September of 2019, the Assistant Vice President of Mechanical at Canadian Pacific, Baden Tidd, said the railroad planned on painting a total of 10 heritage units. The locomotives numbered 7010 through 7014 will wear the company's original Tuscan red, gray, and gold paint scheme with Tuscan red script lettering on the long hood. Locomotives numbered 7015 to 7019 will feature block lettering along the long hood. According to Trains, the locomotives are part of an order for 60 SD70 ACUs using the railroad's stored SD9043 Max. The locomotives are being rebuilt by Progress Rail in Kentucky. The first 4 SD70 ACUs, numbers 7000 to 7003, were recently put in service in British Columbia. After capturing Train 140 at Belleville, Michigan, we again found ourselves trackside at Delray. Our first train, however, would be Canadian National Manifest E251 with an assortment of BNSF and CN power. About 30 minutes later, we witnessed train T28 returning east after picking up interchange cars from Norfolk Southern at Oakwood. Note the GP38-2 trailing as the third locomotive in the consist. Another half hour went by before train 140 was given permission by Delray Junction. The conductor had stepped out of the cab for a brief smoke before going through the junction. He must have been feeling pretty good because he wasn't shy of showing off his muscles to the Borg family. We raced ahead to capture the train once again at the old Michigan Central Station. In June of 2018, Ford Motor Company purchased the building from the previous owner with the intent to restore the structure and eventually use it for the company's autonomous vehicle department. The renovation will be lengthy, but Ford is optimistic about having the building open for use within the next decade. As the train approached the tunnel, the conductor stepped out for one final smoke break before the train entered Canada. Railfans on the bridge were concerned he might ruin their photos, but thankfully the conductor politely ducked back into the cab at the perfect photo opportunity. We were able to capture the train with two other well-known Michigan railfans, the Hubbards, a father-son duo who both share a lifelong passion for trains. From the Bagley Street Bridge, we watched as Crazy Eights entered the tunnel as the train picked up speed. Once Train 140 was outside of the United States and into Canada, we ventured back to River Rouge to capture the Delray Connecting Railroad one last time. Delray Connecting Railroad, operated by U.S. Steel subsidiary Transtar Rail, supplies the Great Lakes Works with many and varied services to the iron-making and steel-making groups. Coke is delivered by CSX and CN to the Delray for transportation to the blast furnaces. Since 2007, coke made on Zug Island is used at the blast furnaces, with the railroad providing the switching services. On October 1st, 2006, the Delray began performing the hot metal shuttle move from Zug Island to the BOP shop. In 2006, the Delray Connecting Railroad handled a total of 36,453 revenue car loads. In addition to providing the works with a full-service railroad switching operation, the Delray Connecting weighs and dumps cars at a rotary dumper. The company also maintains its own trackage and repairs equipment on site. In addition, the Delray Connecting also provides raw materials processing services to the works. The Raw Materials Group operates 2 power screeners, 2 stackers, and one fixed plant that processes furnace coke, nut coke, and breeze materials. They also process B scrap and mill scale for sale by Great Lakes Works. In 2006, 253,412 tons of material were processed. The Delray Connecting is also responsible for the operation and maintenance of the 3 movable bridges that allow movement of rail cars and vehicle traffic onto Zug Island. The bridges are movable to permit lake vessels to travel under and around the bridges while traveling between the Rouge and Detroit rivers. Detroit's south side will never be the same with the silent mills on Zug Island. The mill-operated railroad will soon lose its place as a transportation carrier, and the bottle trains will also stop. Only time will tell what will happen with U.S. Steel nationwide, and this might be the beginning of the end. Until next time, thank you for watching Delay in Block Productions. I'm your host, Drayton Blackgrove. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great railroad content. Happy railroading from all of us at Delay in Block Productions.